Hey, Trail Kreitzer here with goHUNT. We're a couple weeks out from the bow hunt starting. I was lucky enough to draw an antelope tag here in Nevada. My hunt kicks off August 1st. I know a lot of guys are just getting ready to get going. Deer hunts start early in Nevada and some other states too. So guys are thinking about broadheads and broadhead tuning and trying to make sure that their bows are hitting with broadheads where they wanted to. So today I want to just take a few minutes and give you some tips and tricks on how I set my broadheads up, how I shoot them in, and hopefully give you some ideas on how to make sure that your broadheads are impacting where you want them to. So this year, I'm actually shooting the same broadheads that I've shot for the last couple years. This is the QAD Exodus broadhead. I shoot a 100 grain head. The arrows I've got here are a gold tip platinum pierce KINETIC arrow. Just 3 blazer vanes, totally set up. They're about 435 grains. I get really good flight out of these. You know, these arrows I've already cut and tested and I've shot groups with. I know that these are 2 fairly straight arrows from my dozen. So I'm just going to show you how I set those up and give you some ideas on how you can make sure that your broadheads are hitting where you want them to. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to pop off the filled tip, just throw on a broadhead. Simply just screw them on. They make broadhead tools. I'm just going to finger tight these. You know, be careful that when you screw those in, you don't cut your finger. They're extremely sharp. The first thing I like to do is just go ahead and give them a test in my hand. So I'm just going to stick the point in my hand. Just going to blow on the outside of the vane here to get that arrow to spin. What that does for me is it allows me to kind of feel how that tip rotates on that arrow, and pretty quickly I can tell if the arrow's straight or, you know, it's got a little bit of wobble in it. So I can tell that arrow is actually really straight. You know, I took the time when I made these arrows to square everything on a little G5 arrow squaring device. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to spin this on a little Pine Ridge arrow spinner. That's just going to give me a second opportunity to look at that arrow spin and just see how it's rotating. The other cool thing about these little arrow spinning devices, you can move your arrow from one end to the other. You can kind of get an idea on if the arrow is true throughout. One's got a little bit of wobble, might be the weight at the end of it. The other thing I like to do, and I don't have one here today, but you could actually stick this against a wall or a piece of cardboard, get that point, and as you rotate at that arrow, you'll actually be able to see if you're getting any kind of rotation or spin that's abnormal, some wobble in your broadhead. This arrow looks like it's actually really straight. I'm just going to grab this other arrow and test it and see how it does. And again, I'm going to just blow on it first and see how it spins in my hand. So that arrow is relatively straight. I mean, it's still a super straight arrow. I can tell that it's probably not quite as straight. The alignment maybe is not quite as good as this arrow. I'm just going to give it a spin here on the arrow spinner and see what it looks like. And I can already tell, if you look right here at the end of the tip, and I don't know if you can zoom in on that, but you can see there's just a little tiny bit of wobble in the end of that arrow. So a lot of guys might be wondering, like, what can you do with that arrow? And you know, this one is quite straight, but you know, if you set up a bunch of arrows, you'd see that there's a lot more that have more wobble in them. But one of the things that you can do, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, is just simply flex that arrow. And you know, a lot of the times you can actually flex the inconsistency out of the end of that arrow where you can get that to spin true. And I'll show you how you do that. Basically what you're going to do is just take it and set it on a surface that is not going to scratch. It takes some trial and error to find the sweet spot, but basically what you're going to do is just set your arrow down so it's firm, place it on a hard surface, and you're just going to kind of flex it. And as you flex it, you know, give it a try again and spin it and see what it does. So I can see that actually added a little bit of bend. It actually added wobble to it. So I'm going to rotate it a different direction. And like I said, it takes some trial and error to flex that out. Not quite there. So basically what you want to do is just keep rotating that arrow, keep track of your vanes. You know, start at one point, rotate, flex, spin. You know, if that doesn't get you your desired result, rotate, spin, or flex, spin, and just eventually you'll find that sweet spot on that arrow so it spins true. It might take you some time. It might take 15 or 20 minutes to find that sweet spot, but I can guarantee you, 99 times out of 100, you can get an arrow to flex that out and it'll actually spin true. So eventually you can flex that out to a point where you can get a nice spin. Yeah, so I can see that arrow is really straight now. I can also tell by spinning it, I get a nice true spin on the end of that broadhead. So the next point for me, the thing that I like to do is actually shoot my broadheads in. Broadheads are expensive, understandably, but for me, I feel like if I'm going into the field with a broadhead, I need to know where that's hitting on each individual arrow. Your arrows are gonna vary a little bit depending on how you fletch them and the spine of the arrow. So the spine is essentially the stiff side of the arrow. As this arrow comes out of your bow, there's going to be some flex to it. And ultimately what you would like to have is all your arrows to come out of the bow the exact same way with that stiff side of the spine so that you get good, proper, true flight. If you have a spine tester, you can easily do that. If you don't have a spine tester, what you can do is essentially shoot each individual arrow with a broadhead at distance, and ultimately it'll tell you, that all your arrows are set up the same way and that your spine is consistent on the same side. So what I like to do is I'll screw on a broadhead. I know that this arrow's straight. I just spun it. I'm going to actually start shooting this arrow set up as it is. I'm going to start shooting at maybe 20 yards and see where it hits. If it hits true, I'm going to move out to maybe 30, 40, 50, 60. What you'll find is you get out to extended yardages, assuming that your bow is tuned, you'll start to see some inconsistencies in your flight from arrow to arrow. So let's say I'm shooting this arrow and I'm hitting 4 or 5 inches to the left at 60 yards. What I'm going to start doing is actually rotating this knock and then reshooting. So what I like to do is I'll rotate it at a quarter. I'll shoot that arrow again and see where it impacts. I may have to shoot it 2 or 3 times to see if my impact point changes. If that doesn't work, I'm going to rotate it another quarter. I'm going to shoot it again until I find the stiff side of that spine, and I know that arrow is coming out of the bow the way I want it to, and it's impacting the point that I want it to at extended yardage. At that point, I may end up with my cock vein kind of off to the side or some other weird way, that you don't like. Some people, their solution to that is they'll actually fletch, 3 veins of the same color. When they find their cock vein, they'll just mark it. For me, what I'll do is I'll just take a pen, matcher, and I'll actually mark my knock, my stiff side where I want it. A lot of the times I'll just strip those veins and I'll refletch the cock vein down to match the spine of the arrow. I'll take the broadhead and I'll actually shoot it again just to confirm it. But that's kind of what I do. That's the steps I take to make sure that all my broadheads are hitting where I want it to. For me, I like to use the broadhead I'm going to use on the arrow, and then I'll actually just put new blades on each individual broadhead to ensure that they're sharp. It's a lot of work to make sure that your broadheads are shooting where you want them to, but it's a worthy endeavor to know that when you go into the field, you have complete confidence in your equipment. So hopefully those are some tips and tricks on how to set your broadheads up that'll work for you. That's what I've been doing. It works great for me. If you have any questions or comments about this, about broadheads or gear, or how to set up your broadheads, how to get them to fly right, feel free to drop a comment below and be happy to answer those questions for you. We'd also appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to our channel. That helps us produce more content like this. Once again, it's time to get your broadhead set up and time to go hunting.